Thanks, Debs, and welcome everybody to this fourth session of the RCVS Workforce Action Plan, where we're going to talk about, as Debs explained tonight, welcoming a modern way of working. I thought before we started, I'd just briefly summarise for everybody what the ambitions were that were outlined in that Workforce Action Plan that was published at the end of 2022. If anybody's interested in looking at a more detailed version of that, it's all on the Royal College website. We know the major issues that underpin our workforce crisis are, of course, threefold. We know recruitment is one of those, in that despite the fact we have new schools coming online, we still don't have enough vets and nurses to fill the demand for our veterinary services. We know retention is a problem as well. We know high numbers of vets and nurses are leaving the professions every single year. And of course, that for a wide range of different reasons. That may be because of stress at work, unsociable working hours, inability to marry together home life and work life. We also know there are a lot of people who leave the profession who would like to return to the profession, but perhaps they don't see it as an attractive option. So there's opportunities there for us to actually increase our engagement and get people to return back to either the veterinary or the nursing profession. The 7 ambitions that were presented in the action plan that came out of the summit were, and I'll just go through them very briefly for you, were to shape leaders at all levels, were to look at confidence, culture and recognition, to look at greater responsibility for veterinary nurses. Our theme tonight, welcoming a modern way of working. And then 3 subjects that we're going to tackle later this month and into April. So general practice, a chosen pathway, which we're going to do on March the 30th, I believe. Our 6th ambition, which is an attractive career for everyone, including those who have left, which will be on the 5th of April. And then improving client interaction and communications, which will be on the 12th of April. So more to come, and we'd love you to join us for those if you possibly can. So as I've said, tonight's focus is going to be on ambition 4, which is welcoming a modern way of working. And one of the things that I want to do in tonight is I want to explore lots of different themes. I want to try and be as inclusive as we can. I want us to talk about vets and vet nurses. I want us to talk about independent and corporate practice. I want us to talk about small animal. I want us to talk about equine, and I want to talk about production animals. So I really want us to explore as wide a range of the profession as we possibly can. And if we go back to what it says in that original report, it says we need to develop processes to support the professions to test and trial new ways of working that enable efficiencies, enjoyment, and more positive interaction with clients. I'm delighted that tonight we have a panel of stakeholders from across the profession to share their thoughts and experiences on the topic. And we've had an awful lot of questions already. So thank you to all of you who've already submitted questions. I think I've probably got more than 100 questions so far, many of which we've already shared with our panelists. And what they're going to try and do for us is try and address some of those around some very broad themes when they give us our presentations in just a few minutes. So I'm going to start off before we have a short presentation from our guest speaker tonight, Rick Harris. I want us just to introduce our panel, and what I'm going to get them to do in turn is to unmute themselves and just give us a brief introduction, what they are and why they're here. So first of all, Caroline Argo. Caroline, do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to us all? Caroline.
Certainly can, Sue. Thank you very much for the invitation to join the panel tonight. It's a very important one for us. My name is Caroline Argo. I am Dean of Veterinary Medicine and head of school for the new vet school that is starting up in Scotland. I think that's probably enough of a way of introduction as to what I am. I do have quite a long background in veterinary academia, having travelled through Liverpool Vet School, Surrey Vet School, pitching up in SRUC as Dean of Faculty when somebody popped the very salient question of, do you think we need to open a vet school? So that's where I'm coming from tonight. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, and I really look forward to your presentation, Caroline. Next we have Katrina Curtis. So Kat, do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to us all?
Yes, hi everybody. Like Caroline, really excited to be here tonight and to be part of this panel in an area that those who know me know I've been passionate about for a long time. I currently work for Pets at Home and Vets for Pets in a head of sustainability role, but I am a Edinburgh grad, sort of back 2004, so almost 20 years ago, which is still sort of making me shake myself today. But I've had quite a sort of what I would call very squiggly career. So I've worn pretty much every hat I think that there is to wear. I've worked in practice of all types, independent, corporate. I've been a locum. I spent time in the pharmaceutical industry, working in partnership with sort of practices literally up and down the country, and then more laterally in my role at Vets for Pets, before Pets Hall, which was very people focused, so led sort of a transformation of our graduate support and sort of some leadership development. But I was also SPIV's president and worked on SPIV's board for about 10 years, and very much sort of facing into a lot of the issues that we have, and organised a seminar for vet students, which those of you who are a similar age to me will remember, called Lancaster, for about 6-7 years, which was all focused on how we sort of look into the future for sort of our newer, younger vets. I'm also a mum, and I'm flying a little bit solo tonight. So if a small 2-year-old appears, yeah, that's the reality of life.
And thank you, Kat. And I think it's a really great illustration of the fact how we all have to juggle managing our careers, our work life, and obviously our family commitments as well. So absolutely, if you need to go off and put someone to bed, do feel free to do that. And Carol, I should mention as well, Caroline has got to leave us at about 7:30 because she's got another work commitment to go to. So we're going to make the very best of you, Caroline, while you're here. Now, I believe we should have Jack Pye also joining us, and I'm not sure, Debs and Sophie, whether Jack's been able to join us. He's been having internet problems. Do you know if he's on the line or not?
I don't think he's been able to join us.
Okay, not to worry. Obviously, Jack will join us if he can. He's our veterinary nurse who's going to obviously give us some insight into that. So let's go on to our fourth panelist, and I'm delighted to say we have Steve Howard joining us. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself to us all?
Yes, thanks, Sue. Hello, Steve Howard, Head of Clinical Services at PDSA. Those kind of not familiar with PDSA, we've got 48 pet hospital and clinics spread nationally, Wales, Scotland, England and Northern Ireland. And my role at PDSA, where I've now worked for 23 years, is to make sure that we are compliant with legislation and regulation, but also to ensure that we're delivering as a charity an appropriate level of service to our clients and our pets, and to make sure that the quality of that service is kind of where we want it to be, which is a really good quality service.
Oh, you're still on mute, Sue.
Put myself there. So sorry, Steve, I put myself off mute now. And I know that the PDSA faced huge challenges during COVID, and that you did an enormous amount of innovation. So I'm really keen to hear your insight a little bit later on. So I'm assuming that we don't have Jack with us. Someone will tell me if we have. I'm looking to Sophie. I'm looking to Debs. I don't think we have Sophie. No. He's not been able to join us. Okay, never mind, it's not a problem. So before we dive into discussion with our three panel members, let's introduce Rick Harris, who's going to give us a short presentation. Rick is the founder of Customer Faithful, a research consultancy who some of you might have met during the series of insight sessions that we did ahead of the Workforce Summit in 2021. So Rick, I'd like to hand over to you, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Good evening, everyone. Great to be here. I'm really running the gauntlet tonight. I've got a dodgy broadband signal with the weather, and I've got 2 sleeping dogs. So let's see how we get on. Yeah, great to be here. It's been nice to have a platform for 10 minutes or so, just to say really the foundations of where the action plan and this particular ambition came from. Because it's been a while in the making. It kind of dates back to the very end of 2021, when we ran a whole series of focus groups and some one-to-one interviews with various members of the profession, from vet practices through to people who are working out on farms, through to people who'd actually left the practice recently, to young people who just joined. Vets, vet nurses. It really was a diverse audience, and that was very deliberate. We got a fantastic response, I have to say, people wanting to talk and help. UK-wide, certainly, right across the UK. And out of it, you know, we've got so many comments and insights, hundreds. I have a database of hundreds of quotes of how people felt about what could affect recruitment and retention and returning to work. So that was a wonderful start and gave us very up-to-date insight. Having collated all of that, we took that to the Workforce Summit, which was just even later in 2021 at the end of November, to share those insights, of course, with another even wider group of stakeholders, including government and academic and so on. to give them a chance to rub the edges off it, and particularly to start thinking about how we could change things. And we used that, you can see just a picture of what happened at that event, but we used a particular approach called design thinking. We've run a bunch of sessions with the college on this, so you might have even seen me talk about this before, which frames problems in a positive, constructive way. It has this sort of how might we language, and I would recommend you try that tonight, just to look at the very real problems that still exist and how might we address them. And that was what we kind of started getting our hands dirty on back in the end of November 2021. And then the output of that meeting really is where the college picked up the data a little more considered at that point, and started to build the ambitions that you've been going through over the last few weeks. The observation that I think I would make that has been most obvious in the months that it's taken, and it doesn't surprise me that it took months because there was so much data, is the integration of the individual themes that we took out of the focus groups to come up with a coherent, integrated program, which I think is what the ambitions represent, including, of course, what the college was doing anyway. And let's not forget there was a whole bunch of things that were going on and which were widely referenced in the focus groups. So I think that's been the progression of how the voice of the professions really has been considered all the way through that process. These were the 6 themes that came out of the focus groups, and they're quite closely aligned. I'll show you that in a second, to the ambitions that we have now in the action plan. As you can see, they do span things that are happening for everybody and things that are quite specific to certain career stages. And that was quite interesting how those varied through the sessions. So the next slide really just shows how we've morphed from those 6 into the 7 ambitions. And I did, in an earlier attempt, try to draw arrows that showed how they've all gone to different places. But as I said, the reality is that they've really integrated across lots of different directions. What I wanted to do, particularly on tonight's ambition, welcoming a modern way of working, I think it's fair to say that I had more insight and comments on this particular ambition, this topic, than any of the others. It really was. It touches on so many of the others as well, of course. And I wanted to just share with you just a few quotes, actual quotes from what was said in those focus groups. And the first couple actually, pick up on as it was kind of labeled by the groups, family unfriendly. And some quotes there. If I stayed full time, I'd never see my son. I'm gone before he goes to the nursery. He's asleep by the time I get home. My partner's gone part-time. Every vet I know who is a mother has gone part-time. And I'm conscious of the lost hours I've put on my colleagues. And I think that's a really telling point as well. And the one underneath is another particular version of that. Now it's mostly women, referring to that there is obviously a high number of feminization in the vet profession, and 40 hours plus weekends on a rota isn't family friendly, even if you cram it into fewer days. So those and I could have shared many more comments that are running to that theme. So that's definitely one I'd like to put on your radar for tonight. The second one was about the pandemic. We were just still in actually a bit of restrictions at the time of the focus groups, and they were very clear to say that a good quote there. I think that the pandemic has sped up the issues, but they were always there before. It's been a transition over many years, and this has been a bit of a catalyst, really, the pandemic. Some people mentioned Brexit in the same way, the pandemic more so. Then there were some more specific comments about inclusion and diversity, saying, with the kind of pressures we're under, particularly in terms of COVID, it's very hard for people, for example, with disabilities in such a workplace to still be able to give their whole selves. And I could have mentioned other minorities in that way as well. So I don't want to just align that to disability. So I think people are saying, let's not pretend that this is just the perfect storm of the pandemic and Brexit. These issues run deeper and further back. The third one I wanted to pick out was a more positive look, a kind of future forward looking, which I hope helps you in your job tonight. I guess that's what you're going to get into. Some people was one quote suggesting human factors, flexible working, training people to have a positive mindset towards setbacks. Interesting that they felt that errors, struggles, trying to deal with change on the fly, and goodness, COVID taught us to do that, were setbacks that we should have given ourselves the team behaviors to tackle, and sometimes we didn't, and therefore they felt that that is something that would be required, you know, really in any environment. And that bottom one, I don't expect the client attitude to change back. From that was a reference to the more demanding clients that we have today, but also the 24-hour, 24/7 society that we have. We're saying, let's not try and put the genie back in the bottle. We are where we are. We just got to work with them, perhaps educate them, manage their expectations a bit more, and find a way to cope, because at the moment we're not superhuman and we're struggling to manage that increased demand that COVID brought, and also the rise in expectations of clients. And a few other points I just wanted to throw in at this late stage is just reading around the many other comments that were touching on some of the other themes. Examples such as part-time working. We've seen a growth in part-time working. They were saying, I've done this as much through respite as a positive choice as that's something I want to do. I'm doing it because I'm trying to cope. Some talked about their family life as well, but a lot of people just saying, I can't cope with the stress. So this is my way of working it out, and conscious that that is losing hours for the practice and the stress that puts on others who are not doing that. So if you're going to think about modern working, I think the message I took from the insight in its purest form was, we've got lots of different types of staff, and we don't have a model at the moment that really embraces the flexibility needed to get the best out of those different types. And hopefully those quotes speak to some of the different types, and I could speak all night on the many others. So the final comment I'd make is that they were saying, we've tried, it's not that we haven't tried to change and flex, but it's really hard, particularly when you're under pressure. So if there was a facilitator and some kind of catalyst to promote innovation and help showcase the ones that are making it work, that can inspire others to copy that or adapt that to make it work for them, then that's very motivating. And I think that's what you're doing in holding this meeting and the others like it. So with those sort of bullet points and some of those real life quotes in mind, I hope that kind of inspires your thinking for tonight and gives you a stepping stone for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. That's really useful. And that what's really interesting is when I went through the questions earlier on today, that those same themes are coming out really strongly. And those are certainly some of the things that I want to try and explore as we sort of chat and discuss. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just in 2 seconds, I'm going to just introduce Caroline and get her to give us a little bit of an insight. But what I'd like everybody to do, please, if you will, is I'd really welcome not just necessarily questions for our panelists, but comments. So if there are comments that you agree with, comments that you disagree with, please stick them in the chat. The chat is open there so everybody can see them. I'm happy for people to respond to that. I want this to be as interactive as we possibly can, and I will take both positive and negative comments either way. So, Caroline, thank you. You've been waiting patiently. You want to unmute yourself and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sue, thank you. And thank you very much for letting me talk to this audience. It's a really, really interesting topic. I spent most of my career in England, very, very aware of the vet shortages in the areas there. But I think coming home to Scotland, it really rammed it home to me very hard, how much of a societal impact the shortage of vets, not only across the profession, but within key areas within the profession, is capable of having on a nation. And we are getting to quite a crisis stage up here. We've survived for the last decade, really by the good grace of our European cousins that have come across and held down some of the less acceptable to UK graduate veterinary jobs. But it's not something that's sustainable. In Scotland, we are totally dependent on our veterinary workforce, as we are on our medics. They sustain our remote communities. Without those communities, we have no tourism industry. They sustain our major product, which is food and drink up here. Really high welfare, high quality beef and meats is a really key thing for Scotland. We can't get them certified, we can't get them slaughtered, we have a lack of production animal vets. But I think one of the biggest impacts we're seeing is the impact on our remote and rural practices. we just can't sustain some of these practices anymore. The impact is massive. Charles Milne, when he reviewed the state of veterinary services in Scotland, referred to it as the constant churn of staff. The resilience of staff across the industry might be about 7 years, but in remote practice, it's 2. And when you turn vets over that rapidly, the big thing that we're seeing is the loss of the expertise that the country needs to go forward. That can't go on. Somehow we have to amend this situation. Somehow we have to have a sustainable homegrown talent pool that does fit all the challenges and the less sexy, if I can call it that, areas that society needs in order to function. So with SRUC, we're looking at an organisation that has a remit to support the natural economy. So we're heavily invested already in veterinary nursing, veterinary research. We conduct the veterinary disease surveillance for Scotland. So there's a lot of background and a significant presence in the veterinary arena here. So for us, trying to do things differently by introducing a new vet school was the next obvious step. We're completely aware it's not going to fix everything. It's one aspect of all the problems that we're looking at. Some of the problems we have are slow and are very rapidly fixed. This isn't. It's going to be a minimum of 5 years before we start feeding vets into the Scottish industries. So we have an issue here, really trying to get something very different going. We're in a unique position. It's very difficult to turn a vet school around mid-stride once it's established. But we thought it was time to try something new. I think there's 2 ways of looking at this. We tend to always look at the workplace and say, can we fix the situation there? And in Scotland, I'm absolutely sure there are issues that do need to be addressed in those arenas. But sometimes we have to sit back and look at the vets. Are the vets fit for the workplace? Are we choosing the wrong people to come through? You know, I mean, our graduates, our applicants are not exactly the most diverse community in the world. There are a lot of barriers to entering the profession. It's expensive in all shapes and forms. It's inaccessible. And I speak to you here as an Eastern Highlander who should have gone to vet school straight out of school and didn't. I was absolutely terrified of the big central belt cities. It was too big a step. What we've seen from Australia and America is that if you actually enable students from remote communities to enter the veterinary profession, they go back there and they stay there. That is exactly what their ambition is. That's what they're lined up to do. That's what they're passionate about. So we're going to try a very similar model at SRUC. We're going to take a much more holistic approach to admissions, widening participation, recognizing too that a lot of our schools don't teach chemistry. So we've got to find some other way to remediate that. So we'll also put in place gateway programs that will train them as veterinary technicians. If they make the higher grade, then we will interview them with a view to taking them into the vet school. So it's things like that that we're beginning to do to diversify education for vets. The other piece that we found quite stunning actually was the lack of resilience that was noted among our remote practices in our food sector of new graduates coming in. They didn't give it much of a chance. It was, as some of my people have said to me quite often, we've consulted externally very widely, it was a shock. They came from being surrounded by all the expertise the veterinary profession possesses to the flea consult in Orkney. It wasn't going to work. So it is something that we're trying to address on that front. We're trying to introduce, it's not new now, it's been tried several times. We will use the distributed model for the school so that our students undertake their clinical training in authentic veterinary practices, able to understand what the day one job is going to look like, well prepared to go into those practices and lend a hand, and hopefully not get that shock of transition as they morph into the workplace. So an awful lot to be said there, Sue, but really putting forward the point that veterinary education, the vet schools, are the gatekeeper to the profession. Who we take in is reflected very quickly in who we are. So I know some of that will be contentious, and I know I tend to run into a lot of resistance from people who are absolutely wedded to the traditional model, but we're going to give it a try. We honestly think this is a solution. We're able to embed things like OVS training into the program so that our students are ready to go on day one. I'm I'm very, very hopeful of what we're trying to do. And it will be a slow burn, but it should be able to be a slow burn that has significant impact for the profession. Sue, I'm sure I've overtalked my time, so I
No,
will
you
stop
haven't overtalked your time. That's fine. So I'm going to abuse my position as chair, Caroline, as I know you've got to go. So I'm just going to fire a few questions at you, if I may. So first of all, I mean, I think one of the problems that perhaps people are concerned about is with the increasing numbers of distributed models, because obviously SRUC is a distributed model, Surrey is, Keele is going to be to some extent, and also UCLan is going to be. How are you going to be able to support vets in practice who are going to be taking students in to train when they're already pushed, you know, because of our workforce shortage? What are you going to do to help support that?
Absolutely fair point, and one that's been well considered, as you can imagine. Many things. It's a two-way thing. It's not just you take the student and teach it for us. We will have very heavy interactions in the practice from vet school staff, monitoring the students, making sure everything's going in a straight line. We will again train some of the staff within the practice to be able to do that, and we're not expecting anything to come for nothing. Nothing comes for nothing. We will actually pay for our students to be present in those practices, their travel, their subsistence. The whole thing will be gold-plated to that extent. We have had a lot of approaches from practices. This is not something we're thrusting on them. This is something practices are asking to engage in. Part of that, Sue, is linked to our ambition to largely train Scottish domicile students. And that is one of the big things that the practices are saying to us. You know, there's EMS, it's wonderful to have international students in. It adds massively to the day job. It's enlightening in many ways, but we know that person isn't going to stay with us. So again, one of the big inductions for the people that are coming to us is to be able to have a very good look at the graduates that are coming through. It is part of a selection process. We always knew EMS was. IMRs, intramural rotations in the distributed model, serve the same purpose. So we're feeding them a pool from which they can select. And I think that's been a very big driver.
And do you think, Caroline, because you're selecting students from the local area, they're more likely to stay? Because that's one of the biggest challenges. And it's not just Scotland that faces that. We see that in Wales. We see that in other more geographically remote areas. Is that the key to it, do you think?
I think it's one of the keys. If we're just looking at the remote rural part, of course, is the food sector. There are, believe it or not, people out there who are very, very keen and enthusiastic in the food sector, but maybe don't have the same opportunities either. But yes, we've been talking to Charles Sturt and some of the other universities in Australia and America. There is evidence that this does work. So Charles Sturt in particular, very, very strong record of putting students back into the community. They won't all. Absolutely not. Nobody's assuming that. But if we can increase the proportion of students that stick where Scotland needs them, I'm talking very parochially here, then we will slowly turn the tide. So it's a very different type of person we're talking about. So let us take the risk. If it works, I think we're doing something absolutely fabulous for the profession.
And I think as well, you're not just working in isolation, you're working with Glasgow and Edinburgh as well. There's a lot of partnership that's going there, isn't there, in Scotland?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not competition up here, it's complement. We already run some of the rotations for Edinburgh and Glasgow in remote and rural practice, and are working again with them at the moment around ambitions in the aquaculture area. It is Scotland's biggest production animal now, so we need to be taking that into account.
And I think the other thing, finally, before I let you go, and I'm sorry I'm keeping you,
No,
is and I know you're not unique in this, all of the schools are looking to increase the diversity of their intakes of students, and particularly we're not just talking about people from widening participation backgrounds or from BAME backgrounds, we're looking at getting more boys into the profession. What are you doing, and what are the schools generally doing around that?
Oh, we're doing an awful lot, actually, and we're putting alternate routes in place. And I don't think there's much we can do about boys' preparedness when they're leaving school in terms of the qualifications. For us, some of that will have to come later. We are interacting with the schools. We have a REACH programme running through University of Aberdeen that is actually going into the schools, again, to try and talk to the students, talk to the careers teachers, begin to turn that tide. If they're, by that point, they're pretty well committed on where they are. there's nothing I can do in getting them chemistry A level if there's nobody to teach them. So those are areas too we're looking to amend. One of the big things for us again is cost. With big travel budgets going here, if a student is sitting in Benbecula, then every EMS week begins with a very expensive ferry crossing for a car. Again, trying to ameliorate that, looking at bursaries to help support our students through the EMS phase.
And just one final question. I'm sorry, I told you the last one was the final question. This one really is. We're having a lot of stuff coming through on the chat about apprentice degrees. So comment about that, if you think that's something we should be exploring as a profession. Is that something that you think would work?
Yes, no, not 100% sure. I think a hybrid is probably the way. And when you come to talk about hybrid, then actually the distributed model under our current regulations is as close as you're going to come. I agree there is potential for apprenticeships, but the students do need that fundamental knowledge before they go in. What we're doing is pretty classical, with a lot of input in professionalism, comms training and everything from the outset. By year 4, our students will be pretty well trained and have been out in practice already under our tutelage, and very well skilled, so that final year effectively becomes what you're talking about. It's an apprenticeship. They're still under our care. We're still feeding into their education. We're supporting them every step of the way, and the practices that are delivering into it. I don't know how you come much closer to an apprenticeship than that. We have a slight caveat in that we will do as much training and mixed practice as we can, but to ensure that all our students actually are taught across the species, there will have to be some movement. So we're trying to lengthen the duration of our IMRs so that students can bed into a practice, which is where most of the learning begins.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm sorry I've overrun our allocation of time, and I know you've
an absolute pleasure, and you, I promise, a far better company than what I'm about to face. So,
oh, you old charmer, you. Thank you ever so much. I'm going to let you go. Thank you. Do keep the chat coming in, guys. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand the floor over to Kat. So, Kat, your insights. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, it's very exciting hearing what's about to happen up in Aberdeen as a Bankery lass from just down the road there. So yeah, I think I'll just say a few minutes really, because I'm very mindful that I've never quite seen so many questions come through in advance of a session before, which I think is amazing and just sort of really indicates the level of interest here. And when I was thinking through what I wanted to sort of share, I thought I'd like to share just a few reflections, I guess, about the sort of wider workforce world from outside the vet profession, because I think that's been one of the sort of biggest eye-opening things for me and really helped me think about what's going on within our 4 walls a bit differently. And I've had the benefit of sort of working with a lot of people in the last just 4 or 5 years who've worked outside the profession. And also now my role sort of crosses into the retail world a little bit as well. And then sort of think about how that applies itself. And I know there's a real focus on practical tips here. So I thought I'd just share some practical tips, fitting in with some of the questions on things that I've seen starting to work well, and look ahead to what's coming. So I think just really to start with, I think we know I often say that the way we work in the vet world has not changed for a long time. I used to sort of say we kind of work the same way we worked since 1950, 1960. I think a couple of years ago that was right, but if I look now since COVID, I think COVID has really triggered a change in that. And but we as a society have fundamentally changed, and actually what people want from their work has fundamentally changed. And I think up until recently, generally as a profession, we've sort of been trying to, it's that classic fit a square peg into a round hole thing. We're trying to get the way that people want to work to fit in with how we want them to work, as opposed to us sort of taking a step back and thinking, well, actually, how can we adapt how veterinary practice works to fit what today's workforce is looking for. Now, I know that makes it sound like it's a really simple solution, and it's absolutely not. It's much more complex than that. Caroline also was touching on some of the things there before. It goes right back to sort of who's coming into vet school, how we're training as well. But I'm coming at this from a practice perspective around what can we control in practice and what can we influence. And we know that there's similar challenges to what we're facing in dentistry, medicine, law, accountancy. And what I think is great in recent years is that I know the college, BVA, ourselves, and quite a lot of the other corporate groups are sort of trying to look what's happening there and seeing what's working, what's not, and what we can then translate into the vet profession. We also have a bit of a boiling pot, and I think we fulfill our own prophecy a little bit, and we almost sort of every time I pick up the Vet Times, the Vet Record, there's some sort of doomsday headline around what's going on in the workforce. And again, picking up on a couple of the comments and some of the questions, I think if we all start to collectively think about reframing to become more solution focused, so just like this session is about, even that reframing helps reset our attitude. And all the sort of positive psychological research and insight says that as soon as you start to almost reframe your view and your attitude, solutions open up, which actually you would not have thought of before. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist. I would love to do a sort of behavioural science, neuroscience masters, but I've read quite a bit about it, and it's very proven. So I think it's kind of that reframing from we can't do this because we're vets to how can we do this, and how do we make this work for the vet profession. And then we kind of, and I'm not going to go into this too much, but we layer in just that we've spoken a lot in recent years about millennials. I've spoken at quite a lot of conferences about it and tried to reframe that generations are more similar than they are different. But what we do have now, not to worry people, but Gen Z are starting to come into the workplace. The sort of oldest of them are around 25. So we had sort of the last year or two coming into the vet profession. And we are seeing that actually they are going to be early insights a little bit different in the workplace around their wants and needs. You might have seen some of it in the papers and the news the last week or two around sort of this conscious quitting, or some people are calling it climate quitting, and that if their sort of wider purpose needs are not being met in the business, they're just almost walking straight through. So some of these are just quite good to have in the back of your mind as well. And before I sort of, pick up on the sort of, a bit of that, what I would call the solutionist approach, and start to share some things that I've seen are working in the profession, things to think about. I wanted to share with you actually just a quote from a Deloitte paper that's just come out. So Deloitte publish a global workforce trends paper once a year. Most of your other sort of big consultancies do as well, but theirs is sort of seen as the go-to one. And as I read the part of the summary of it, an overview, you could almost just switch out organisation, which they've used for veterinary practice. And I think it just helps us see that what we're experiencing, we're not alone in it. Lots of people are grappling with this. We have a few other challenges layered into it. So their sort of opening paragraph was just that, organisations, ACCA practices, are traversing a new landscape. They're losing traditional boundaries that kept things packaged and orderly. And now they need to gain permission to experiment, pilot, innovate, to define new fundamentals. And then it goes on to sort of talk about that actually for workers, the rules of engagement with organisations, substitute practices, are shifting, opening the doors for greater and more meaningful collaboration and co-creation in the organisation. And it touches a bit after that actually people who are sort of grappling with this are feeling overwhelmed, and this is sort of senior leaders, of global businesses, and it's making them feel overwhelmed and anxious. And it's encouraging companies of all sizes to think more like researchers. These are literally the words that they're using. And I just thought that was great for us as vets because, we're evidence-based. We have, everything we do is grounded in research. And that if you approach it like a kind of a research challenge or a problem, it's really helping people come to different solutions in what they call this boundaryless world now. It's activating curiosity, it's making people experiment. And that actually we need to fail because we're going to make things better by learning by our failures and getting insights from those. So I just thought that was, I just find these things interesting because I think it helps us think we can also learn lots from each other within the profession, but we can actually come up with some solutions by looking outside and seeing what others are doing. I think well, how do we adapt that into our world? And what they also found within this, actually, when they look at what people are doing, is that organisations that are creating solutions for their future of work with their colleagues are significantly more likely to succeed, in that the people are more engaged in their workplaces and that they're staying for longer. And you know, I think that engagement piece is critical. So, you know, for those of you who are leaders in your practices, who are owners or who are clinical directors, practice managers, I think the more that you can work with your colleagues in practice to come up with the solutions together and not take the burden on your shoulders, which is, you know, we know it is the loneliest role of all, the more likely you are to find solutions that work for everybody. And it's this sort of piece within the profession, I think, of collaborative leadership, because I think we will find there is no one solution fits all. I cannot here, and I don't think anybody here can give you sort of a checklist or a toolkit that is going to sort of solve your individual practices, challenges that you're facing, whatever they are. But pulling from lots and lots and lots of different areas, you'll find the right solution for your workplace. And it, you know, looking at sort of the questions that came through, there was this, I think, just real theme around full-time work, part-time work. It's come up in the chat, you know, a little bit already. And I think I've got a view that in a few years' time, we won't talk about full-time, part-time work. We'll just talk about a modern way of working, about a way of working, because everybody will work slightly differently, and almost the day of these sort of 40-hour contract will be dead. We're already starting to see, you know, different contracts come into the workplace, which ultimately enable different ways of working, because they're not solutions in their own right. They're just something that helps you do something a bit differently, that contribute to that sort of wider culture in your practice, because people still need to feel that they belong there, that they're appreciated, that they're valued, because all of that builds motivation. It actually builds confidence. You know, we know that from a lot of the work that BVA did and published in this area as well. And it's that valuation, that feeling valued, that engagement that connects people to your world. So, you know, but there was some questions around sort of different types. And I certainly think you can look at bank contracts, and there are contracts called term time. I've got a particular bugbear with the name term time, but that's my own personal thing, because I think it sort of talks to just people who've got kids at school. But the premise of term time contracts is actually they're a bit like, you know, an extended annual leave contract, that people are having a set number of weeks off, and within that contract it's agreed when those weeks are. More often than not, it's the school holidays, but it can be used if you've got a vet who is maybe, I don't know, lead cellist in the Welsh, you know, symphony orchestra, or, you know, a Scottish triathlete. And these can be adapted to anything. And then another sort of type of contract, and all of these actually we work with at Vets for Pets now, and I know that other practices and some of the larger groups are also using them, would be annualised hours. And the slight difference between an annualised hours is actually you're just agreeing that over every month or every year, the vet or the nurse will work X number of hours. Now that might be anything from 10 hours, you know, up to a few hundred. It completely depends on that person and your practice. And then almost it becomes a bit of a jigsaw around sort of how you use that. More often than not, people will agree up to 3 months in advance, so it works with the rota, but it just offers a different degree of flexibility. I think there's other things that just to touch on really before sort of stopping that. I just want to say, I think technology is going to fundamentally change the way that we work as vets in the near future. Wait, yeah, Labrador barking. I thought it would be the child. But technology is going to change how we work, how our colleagues work, whether that's utilisation of telehealth in some way, shape or form, whether that's rota tools that we're using, whether that's diagnostic tools that are started to come in that may lift workload. I was at a sort of innovation conference last couple of days, and I was just blown away by what's going to come down the line in the near future for us that can help lift workload, help improve sort of clinical work, but also on the workforce side be fundamentally changing. We've got some great returnship initiatives coming in. And I actually know more vets in the last 6 months who are coming back to work after time away from clinical practice than I've known in the last 5-6 years. We've got other ways we can engage people in practice. I'm going to use where I work now, like sustainability. And I've got a few practices here and that I know of, outside of the Vets for Pets world, who again have got colleagues who are taking up additional responsibility, reducing clinical time and taking up that. Might not be leading sustainability, it might be picking up management duties, it might be leading the vet team. And then wrapping around that, we've got lots of amazing sort of not-for-profit groups, professional organisations doing great things, whether that is vet-led, well-vet, Vets in Mind, Flexi, SPIVs, BSAV, Royal College, BVA, that we now have a wealth of resources to support us, and we will share some of those. So I'll stop now because I can, like Caroline, I could talk on this all night. I'll hand back to you, Sue.
Thank you, Kat. That's really useful. And I think there's lots of themes coming through. There's stuff coming through on the chat, and Garrett's doing a really great job there answering questions on the chat. We have a working group at college around focused or limited licensure, which I think is going to produce some really exciting results over the next few months. Really strong themes that came through, Kat, on the questions that came in and the comments that came in beforehand were around flexible working and part-time working and things. I'm just going to read some of them out. It says, how can we continue to promote and champion flexible working? How can we make part-time work as acceptable as full-time work? Because there seems to be this perception that people who work part-time are in some way lesser vets than people that work full-time.
That's why I think we need to do away just with the terms full-time, part-time, because I think it helps move that on. So I think it just instantly makes people feel like they're guilty for not contributing enough. And
the other thing, before I bring Stephen, just a brief comment on Kat, what about things like portfolio careers? Because we know that a lot of medics do that, where we seem to have this acceptance where we just have one job and that's what we do. What about mixing and matching to give you that variety, give you that, a stressful job and a less stressful job to balance it out? What are your thoughts around things like that?
Yeah, completely. And I think we've got some great examples of both vets and RVNs, and Jack's obviously not on the call, but he's a great example in his own right who are doing that, and it works really well for. It's not you are a clinical vet or you're not a clinical vet. It's not that black and white. There's a vet I know, quite a well-known vet, who works a bit of time, bit of the week in TV, bit of work doing his pottery and a bit of work in clinical practice. I've got another friend of mine who's a clinical vet 2 Saturdays a week, and she works in digital marketing for a human healthcare agency the rest of the time. Both of those are loving life and loving their careers. So I think it comes back to how do we just find ways of working that works for individuals and bust that 40-hour-a-week model, because as long as we try and stick to that, we'll really struggle to move forward.
Okay.
And I think we just need to work together. I'm a big, as anybody who knows me knows, the more that we can share collectively what's worked well, what hasn't, and be really open and transparent about things that we've created and share. That's how we'll move forward, by kind of collective leadership in the profession rather than competitive leadership. And that's across charity, corporate, practice, industry.
Okay. Thank you, Kat. I want to be able to bring Steve in. So for now, thank you. And Steve, I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So as part of our brief, it was to think about new ways of working that were introduced during the pandemic that have perhaps shaped how we deliver our services or veterinary care still today. So I'm going to focus on 3 areas really that PDSA we kind of embraced during the pandemic, partly because we had to adapt and adapt quickly. And I think, Rick, in your presentation, you used the term that someone said the pandemic sped up the issues that had already been around. Well, the pandemic also sped up the development and the use of technology and our approach to work and where people work and how people work. And the first area really that I want to talk about is around that remote and hybrid working. So early on in the pandemic, within 2 weeks of the lockdown, we'd switched from about less than 5% of our consultations, I think, happening in the remote world up to over 80%. And we were able to set our teams up at home with access to the practice management system so that they could deliver a good quality service remotely, and that also fed into some hybrid working. So we're spending some time in the pet hospitals and some time at home remote working, and that ability to work in a hybrid fashion was certainly embraced by many of our teams, and we've kept that remote working. We could, at the end of as the pandemic waned, moved back to exactly what we were doing prior to the pandemic, but we kind of recognized that if we're able to embrace that remote working, we can manage a number of cases online, and we can do it well, because having all the right checks and balances in place to make sure that the outcomes are where they should be, and that the team are healthy and happy at home as well, can lead to us relieving some of the pressure on what is probably one of our biggest constraints, which is our bricks and mortar. So now we've got 30 full-time equivalent positions that are purely remote positions, but those are filled by 80 veterinary surgeons. And we found that when we've gone out to recruit into one of those remote positions, we've had a hugely increased number of applicants from that we get for the face-to-face roles that we might advertise. So there's a real appetite out there for people to take up that work. And as part of that, having 80 veterinary surgeons delivering 30 full-time equivalent roles means that we're able to tailor the hours that people work when they're working remotely to what their needs are, and their lifestyle, and what they're able to deliver. And I think it feeds into ambition 6 as well, which is about that return to work, where some people who, for physical reasons, might not want to work in that face-to-face, and in our hospitals sometimes very busy environment anymore, that can be quite physically demanding, who are excellent veterinary surgeons who have a lot to offer, and do deliver a lot for us by working remotely. So I think it's that embracing that new way of working opens up the key sometimes to opening one of the other ambitions from the workforce plan. And it's not just remote working that allows that flexibility. During last year, we kind of recognized that, and I think you said it, Kat, in so many words, the power is now with the team and the employee, rather than the employer who says, you will come and work for me for this many hours a week between these hours. And we had a real focus on individualism and flexibility, and moving away from that really rigid, flexible working request process that we had in place, and I'm sure a lot of other workplaces had in place, so that requests for working non-traditional hours, you might say, are approached with a more of a can-do attitude and a positive attitude, to try and make sure that if a particular pattern of working fits with somebody's lifestyle or needs better, that we do our very best to able to accommodate that. Because at the end of the day, having somebody for maybe a reduced number of hours per week, but having them there for those hours a week is far better for us and our clients and our patients than having somebody feeling as though they have to leave the workplace because it doesn't fit their lifestyle and what they need. What we also introduced during the pandemic was a prioritization of our service, and that was seen wider when the profession went to emergency. But what we did do was we categorized all of the work that we do in our pet hospitals as emergency, what we would normally do within a week, what we would normally do within a month, and we did that to make sure that we were protecting our our workforce, our teams, and having enough people in the pet hospitals to be able to deliver the care that really needed to be delivered in the hospitals, and that care was resulting in the maximum welfare impact by seeing those cases that most needed it. And we did it for that reason during the pandemic. But during this period following the pandemic, where we've obviously, like everybody else, encountered recruitment issues and had our capacity to deliver constrained by a lack of vets or a lack of nurses in the pet hospitals, we continue to use that prioritised service so that we can control the workload coming through the hospitals, so that the teams are not overwhelmed in the same way that they would have been, that they're not becoming overstressed and overworked by flexing up and down between that emergency and the fuller service, to proactively manage pressures on the teams. And the third area is probably feeding through into a new way of working, but ambition 5 as well, which is making the general practice more attractive, is introduction of a clinical skills framework, where we are having conversations with our teams that are slightly different, or very different, to how they used to be, and charting and encouraging them their development after they join us. So from a new starter through a developing stage, through a competent stage, and into advanced stage, and having individualized conversations with our team members around where they see their development needs are and how we move them through those stages, which means that in the work that they do now, that's targeted to allow them to develop in the way that they want to, but also in the way that our pet hospitals need that mix of skills across the team. But now a lot of the work that they are doing, that they're given, that is targeted towards them, is aimed at encouraging that development through those career stages, which gives a lot more meaning, I suppose, rather than just taking whatever comes and feeling that what they're doing isn't really developing them as individuals, or developing their skills and knowledge. And a lot of the work that they're doing is actually aimed at doing that. And that's something that we introduced at the back end of last year, and we're looking to monitor and see how that works for all the teams. And I think as part of that as well, it means that they're better able to track the outcomes, because in order to know that you're developing, you need to know what the outcomes of the care that you deliver are. And that creates a real awareness and confidence in terms of that contextualized care that we deliver and the pragmatic care that we deliver in the pet hospitals, knowing the interventions that the veterinary surgeons have had with their patients have resulted in an improvement in their welfare. So I am conscious of time, so I'll stop there. Hopefully I can cover some more of those areas a little bit more if there's any questions related to those coming through.
Thank you, Steve. And one thing I just wanted to drill down on, we've had some comments in around, all of this is all very good for large organisations, for large corporate practices. Just give us a bit more detail really on how your hybrid working actually works in the flesh. Do you have people triaging cases? Do you have people consulting? And could that model be applied to independent primary care practice, where you've just, for example, got a small team of 2 vets and 2 nurses? Could they be using people who are remote to help triage and help consult cases? What are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, I'm sure they could. I mean, the smaller the teams that you have, the more difficult it may well be to fit that in. But for example, we're now out of the 60,000 consultations a month that we're delivering, 20,000 of those are done remotely. So there's a proportion of the patient base and the kinds of cases that come through any veterinary practice that, even, and I know we perhaps don't want to go down that road, but even without that derogation to be able to prescribe remotely, can be managed and can be managed very effectively in the remote world. So the rotas that our site managers develop incorporate that those periods in which people are going to be working from home and working remotely.
Okay, thank you. So let me go back to Kat. So Kat, throwing the question back to you. Do you use remote working? Do you use hybrid working? And if so, how do you use that? And how could that be applied to a primary care practitioner who's a single-handed vet or is in a geographically remote area? How can we help those and support those sorts of people?
Yeah, definitely. And it's something I often ask myself around sort of is with everything that we do or introduce, is this possible at a local practice level? And I think I'd agree with Steve that most of it, nearly all of it, is. You're just doing it at sort of a scaled down way. And we've got, by nature being a joint venture agreement, our partners have complete freedom how they work their practices, how they resource them, and what they do. So we've got quite a few practices who operate ways similar to Steve was outlining there, where they're now giving both RVNs and vets time on the rota. Some it's for dedicated, what I'll just call telehealth, where they're using their own sort of video platform from home. Actually, we've got a bit of a system set up done through Susie Samuel's company, where they're utilising WhatsApp, so they'll communicate with clients more through messaging, or it may actually just be that there's now dedicated time for just catching up on those lab reports, those complex cases where you need to do a bit more reading, etc. And they've made it flexible to whether that's done in the practice or at home, completely up to the vet. I've come across the odd sort of example of where actually this is more through my Spivs world, where local independent practices have actually come together to sort of look at different ways that they could sort of have a bit more flexibility as well. And we've recently introduced something that's more of a roaming role, Sue. This is something I know vets now have done before. And PDSA, I think, Steve, you guys have had it, where there is a vet who's recruited to work for a number of hours, and they work across a number of practices in the area, dependent on where there is a need. So it's a sort of halfway house, I guess, between locuming and a more sort of permanent type role. Now, that's probably one that I would say is more challenging to introduce for a single practice. But it's not impossible, because again, it could come down to collaborating with practices in sort of, your county or regional area around something similar. But yeah, I think everything is possible. Even I introduced EMS bursaries about 5 years ago, and even then I thought, actually, yes, we're investing, £30,000 it was in year one into those, but the amount that it was per student would be more than achievable if that was a one vet practice in the Highlands, because we were ultimately just looking at, well, what is it around real living wage, 20 hours a week, part-time, to lift financial pressure off the students so they could focus on their EMS experience and not have to worry about working along the side. And the amount that it was would be more than achievable for an independent practice to do at a local level.
Thank you, Kat. And I suppose, Steve, particularly now with the pressures that we have on costs around client care and the like, and the fact that people are struggling to pay their veterinary bills, the charities are under a huge amount of pressure to try and maintain animal health and welfare. So I'm assuming by the way that you've constructed your hybrid working, this gives you a much more opportunity to be able to offer more service to more people. Is that right?
It does, because like I said, our biggest constraint, really, apart from recruitment in certain areas, is how many people we can deliver the service to in the bricks and mortar that we have. So if we have so many consulting rooms, there's only so much you can do, and obviously so many theatres. So if you can create some virtual consulting rooms on top of the ones that you've got in your pet hospital, then that means you can deliver that service to a wider range of people and make the charitable care as accessible as you can. Yeah.
And because you've actually got a bricks and mortar practice, your virtual vets can be anywhere in the country.
They can and do provide services to wherever they're needed. Yes, they tend to be based at a pet hospital, because the one and part of the briefing said where might there be some issues is if you have a team of remote vets that never really interact with the face-to-face teams, then they can become quite isolated. So they are aligned to a particular pet hospital, and the aim there is that they feel part of that team and they know what's going on in the face-to-face world, as well as what's going on in the remote world. But because they've got access to that practice management system, and we also created an online request form so they can see from wherever in the country. We choose people are waiting for an online consultation. They can deliver that service in any of our hospitals. Yes.
And a question that came through prior to to this evening was someone who says, I have MS, I looked into telemedicine, but the jobs wanted experience. I'm unsure how much advice you can give without examining an animal. So both to Kat and to Steve, do you think that you need to have done face-to-face practice before you could become a telemedicine vet? Is it a different art? Do you need to have that hands-on experience? What are your thoughts? Steve, first of all.
I think it depends how you induct and how you develop people, to be honest, because a lot of I suppose you do gain a lot of experience from having done consulting in the face-to-face world, but the decisions that you need to make in the remote world, as long as you're making those decisions of what you believe is in the best welfare interests of the animal, then I don't think that necessarily that is a must-have. No, so as long as you give them the right tools and develop them in the right way, if they need it, then I'm sure that is perfectly reasonable.
And presumably veterinary surgeons are using their clinical judgment, and if they're not sure, they just redirect a patient to a face-to-face consultation. So they've got that reassurance, they have got that hands-on examination. Would that be about right?
Indeed they do, yeah. That I mean, there's the cautionary approach, I suppose, if you're not sure.
Yeah. And what about you, Kat? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, similar to Steve, then actually. You brought up the very point I was going to bring up, Sue, because I think there was 2 or 3 points, wasn't there, around sort of MS and chronic illnesses and telehealth. And I think it comes to a conversation with the telehealth companies as well around what you feel comfortable with, what you don't, and a lot of whether you're doing it within a practice, because this isn't just about going to work for one of the sort of telehealth companies. You could go and be the video vet, sort of advice a vet, call vet for a bricks and mortar practice. It's about what you feel comfortable with, what you don't, and pulling back, as we've said, to that MRCVS at the end of the day. And if you need to feel it's best to advise to see the practice, and I know most telehealth consults, I think the figures I've heard are sort of depending which company you speak to, it's between 60 and 80% of video consults result in a recommendation to go to the practice advice, and the rest are equally split between keep an eye on it, contact us if you're worried, or we don't need to speak to you again kind of piece. So for those of us who did on call back in the day, probably very similar to small animal on call advice. And I think it looks like there's worry that with some people that they have felt on the paper that they needed experience, that hands-on clinical experience in practice. And what I would just say is, I don't think you can beat picking up the phone sometimes and having a conversation with a practice or a company and talking through your sort of, as much as you feel comfortable, your own situation, and whether there's an opportunity to work together on it. And there are a lot of, if you are sort of on social media, and there's a lot of very safe spaces from a veterinary perspective, be that vet mums. There's the veterinary chronic illness group who have a Facebook group that's is a safe space where you can kind of ask advice, and there will be others out there who've been in a similar situation who'll be able to share their experiences and how they move forward with it as well.
Thank you. And also, Steve, as well, just to come back again on this flexible working, this virtual working, when you're having people apply for your jobs who are doing hybrid working or working as telehealth advisors or whatever, Are you looking that these are working parents, so both mums and dads, who want to have more flexible working hours? Or are you starting to see people returning to the profession where it's suddenly become an attractive option, that they can work remotely, they can work from home, they can be home in time to take their daughter to ballet lessons, or, you know, take their son to rugby, whatever it happens to be? Are you seeing that, those two mixes around that?
Yeah, it was a mixture of both. Yeah, returning and lifestyle or life needs applying, and we have a mixture of both.
Okay, thank you. I think that's really useful. Well, we're just about coming up to time. So one of the other things that's come through on the questions is about career pathways and things for parents who are in practice, and that's something that we're going to explore, I think, in our next session. So those of you who put questions in around that, please join us for the next session. It's a shame that we've got to go, but we do have to go because it's coming up to 8:15. Kat, I know you've now got your hands full, but I'm sure you can multitask because you're a parent. Kat, would you just, I'm going to give you just a bit of breathing space. Steve, would you just like to give us some finishing thoughts, and then I'll go to Kat if she's still there to give us some finishing thoughts. So Steve, what are your finishing conclusions from tonight?
Well, we have focused very much on that flexibility, and I don't think that flexibility does just mean that remote that remote role. I think we've had to embrace flexibility and individualism in our hospital teams, which means looking at how we develop our rotas a little bit more differently and more flexibly, and our site managers are working through that at the moment. And also, if we can keep our teams happy and develop them in the way that they want to be developed, and provide the hours of work when they want to work, that makes for a happier team, and it helps with that retention, which is so important in this time.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for your time and your contribution. Kat, if you can manage your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just putting a few links in because I think the more we can sort of share just where we know there's practical resources that will help. So I'll keep doing that, and I know that Flexi Vet are actually bringing out a toolkit and an educational hub later on, I think, many times, so just watch out for that. But I think it's just that think outside the box. It's just reframing. It's not, we can't do this because it's a vet practice. It's how do we do this, and involve the team, because the more you involve the team, I think it's often easier to find the solutions, and don't be scared to try stuff. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. You just learn how you will then take that forward the next time. And I'm more than happy to be contacted, as I know sort of a lot of Jack is and others. So yeah, please reach out. And
Thank you, Kat. I can see
the whole family's coming.
That's fine. Absolutely fine. And they're all most welcome. So with that, I think we're just about up to time. Sophie's put it in the chat box for us. We'd really like your feedback. We'd like positive feedback and negative feedback, whether you've enjoyed this, whether we should do some more. The next session we've got, which is on March the 30th, I believe, is going to be a really great session. And there'll be some of the themes that came out of, we had a big session at the end of last year around career pathways within primary care practice or general practice, whatever you want to talk about, however you want to refer to it. That I think is going to be a really exciting session. So please join us again for that. And thank you everybody for taking the time out of your evenings to join us. Hopefully you're all nice and warm and comfortable. In Cumbria, it's absolutely lashing down with snow. So I hope everybody else is safe and warm. With that, I'm going to say thank you very much. I don't know whether, Deb, do you want to say anything just to close up, or we're just going to say goodbye to everybody?
Thanks, Sue. No, I just was going to close the session and thank the panel for their time tonight, and to everyone who's commented and put some questions in the box. I will follow up with an email. This will include the feedback link, so do complete that. Any resources that have been shared tonight, I will also share that as well, and the recording will be available in due course. So thank you everybody, good night.
Thank you everybody.